Welcome everybody today to this episode of the Credit Connection. I am here with Chief Marketing Officer of Alkami, Allison Cerra. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Great to be here.
And we also have Joel Middleton, who is a senior statistician from Alkami. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And the reason I have this dynamic duo here is because they've done some really interesting research into mobile banking usage, and wanted to share that with the credit union world today. Allison, Joel, you guys want to provide a little bit of your own backgrounds and a bit about Alkami, and then we'll get rolling into the research.
That sounds great, Sarah. So first, thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here with you and your listeners. So Alkami, we are a digital banking provider in the US. We have about 17.5 million users who use the digital banking platform provided by Alkami in some way, shape, or form. We provide that service to over 220 or so financial institutions in the US. So that's a little bit about who we are as a company. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the company. I've been here now 3 years. And my background before Alkami, I've been in marketing since the earth's crust hardened, as I love to say. This is all I know how to do. Nobody else will have me do anything else for them for good reason. But I've done it for lots of companies, starting off in telecom, working in places like Verizon and what is now Nokia, then moved over into big tech like Intel and HP, and then moved into software with McAfee. So a little bit about some of the companies I've worked for, but I feel like I'm at home now here with Alkami, getting to work with some great financial institutions every day.
Of course, and especially credit unions, right?
Exactly. Of course.
How about you, Joel?
I'm Joel Middleton, and I am senior statistician at Alkami. I started my career in survey research and was a survey methodologist for a number of years. I then went back for a PhD and taught statistics in academia for 10 years at NYU and UC Berkeley. And I'm happy that I recently came to Alkami. I am now like a kid in a candy store, analyzing consumer banking transactions to identify trends in our changing financial environment.
Yeah, I love that. Both of you have such impressive backgrounds.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate you all joining me today. So, as I mentioned, you all have put out this research. And one of the things, as I was reading through it, Allison, you had the introductory letter there.
Yeah.
Essentially, digital banking is table stakes. 80% of adults prefer digital. So what does that mean for banking going forward, as the technology just accelerates faster and faster?
Yeah, so we like to think that digital banking, when we think about it, it is absolutely a required technology for credit unions and banks. Absolutely. And it's the way consumers by and large prefer to do business and conduct transactions. However, that being said, we think that there's an opportunity here to evolve digital banking beyond digital banking. What we mean by that is, if you think about where it all started, it started primarily as a service channel. I could check my balances, I could pay bills, I could then remotely deposit checks. It started its origin as a service channel to basically stop those higher cost channels like branches and call centers from having to service those more routine transactions. We believe that the next frontier is to evolve this to the digital sales and service platform that it needs to be, meaning it needs to be equal parts sales, service, so that you can not just service those account members, but set up new account members, cross-sell products, because we know that is the channel that they are increasingly turning to the FI for, in particular when we look among younger generations who are standing right now to inherit quite a bit of generational wealth being passed down from older generations. So yes, it's table stakes, but there's a big frontier yet to evolve in this space. And that's why we wanted to do the study that we conducted.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Joel or Allison, define the digitally mature and kind of provide a bit of a synopsis of the research for our viewers.
Well, Joel, you want me to start, and then I'm going to let you pile on. Is that fair?
Sure.
Okay, because Joel keeps me honest because he's the one that actually has the statistics degrees. I don't, but he's going to keep me honest. But I'll tell you the inspiration for the study. The inspiration for the study, like much of the research we do, comes from our client community. And our clients are the best of the best, in our humble opinion, and they push us to be the best at what we do. And so our clients were increasingly coming to us saying, we want to understand what digital maturity looks like in our industry. How do I know if I'm ahead or behind my competitors? How do I know if I'm putting my investments in the right area? How do I know what good looks like in this space? And so Joel and I first scoured the web and scoured our own sources to see if we had the answers to these questions, went back to the clients who were asking for it, to which they said, we're really thinking at the big digital sales maturity, kind of not just how many transactions do you do in digital banking every day. Give me something more elevated than that. So the study that we did sought to understand the strategy, the culture, and the technology, those three as one force for the most mature organizations that are applying digital in a way unlike anybody else in the field. And that was kind of the genesis of the study. Among them, the most advanced have something in common. Joel, I'll let you talk to the audience about like what the most advanced institutions in the study, what they all shared in common as a characteristic.
Good. So overall, our approach was to develop a survey instrument based on the information that we gathered from the FIs and the experts in our own institution and our survey research methodologists, and put together a questionnaire which covered kind of the range of topics that we thought really would characterize digital maturity, the concept. And then to analyze that data, once we collected surveys from the institutions, we used a set of techniques known as latent variable modeling to identify the kind of the top 5 questions that were kind of the best indicators. We let the data be the guide, and the latent variable models that we use are similar to the ones used by the SAT test developers who are looking for the best questions to identify whether it's scholastic aptitude in their case, or in the case of, let's say, a psychologist interested in someone's personality, maybe they're trying to get at this latent idea or hidden idea of some kind of personality trait, let's say extroversion or something along those lines. So we use those same kind of techniques to get at this latent construct. And we call it a latent construct because it's hidden. We can't hook you up to a machine and measure your personality, or hook you up to a machine and measure your scholastic aptitude in the same way you can't just like take a physical measurement of an institution and know what its digital maturity is. And so these questions, the latent variable techniques, look at how the answers to those questions manifest that underlying or hidden construct, that latent construct of digital maturity. And so one of the interesting things that we found is that a very important indicator of digital maturity is kind of your mindset, right? And that gets right at that heart of that idea of the latent construct. It's not something that you can directly measure. You have to ask and probe the people at the financial institution to find out, what is your orientation towards new technology and new techniques for giving customers access to new features and things like that. So
yeah, so it's like a cultural change. It's not something that just lies in your IT department, right? It's HR. It's a whole cultural mindset for organizations from the top down. And so despite the recognized importance of digital banking, many banking providers tout member first strategies, but they don't put their money where their mouth is. I think you all found in the research, because there are other things, while they're buying the shiny bells and whistles that consumers see every day, but they're building it on top of legacy technology. And so explain a little bit more about that, and also how you would advise maybe a CIO or a COO or CTO in that kind of situation where they're not getting support from the rest of the C-suite.
Yeah, that's a great point. So one of the things, Sarah, so the audience knows, when we looked at the data using the model that Joel just described, there were 4 segments that emerged from that data. So we've got 4 segments from the least digitally mature to the most digitally mature. To your point, what we see that separates the least digitally mature from all the other three segments that are more mature than they are is this notion of how much they prioritize digital banking and put their investments behind it. So what you see is the least mature organizations in the study, not surprisingly, because I love to say culture eats strategy for breakfast, strategy eats technology for lunch. So it starts with your culture, that informs the strategy, then that informs where your technology goes. So it stands very easy to reason that if you're saying that digital is not important to you as an institution, then as a result, you're not going to have the same digital bench strength as those who are more advanced. So it starts there. When we then start looking along that continuum of the other institutions and the other three segments, the next big fissure you see is in something like deposit account opening, digital account opening for deposit accounts. And what we start to see there is the separation starts to then widen between organizations who do that not just for existing members, but also for new members. So the next frontier tends to be DAO, and especially for new members. And the final frontier, what separates the most advanced, are those that apply and use data in a way unlike anybody else. So they not only have the data tech stack, but they imbue data in their decision making day to day. And they're much more likely to say that they are a results driven institution than others who are more likely to say that they're friendly or team oriented, as examples to describe their culture. So, to your point around how do you get alignment around the C suite, one of the things that we thought was important is how do you give FIs the guide? How do you show them, first of all, what does good look like? And by the way, this study talks to everybody from mega banks and top 50 banks. Neobanks are in this study, all the way to regional and community financial institutions that have at least 200 million in assets. More than 200 institutions are included in this study. And that's a pretty wide field because we wanted to look at the broadest landscape possible to be able to define where is the maturity in the market at large today. First of all, we want to give the assessment to our market to let them know this is what maturity looks like as of today in 2024. Beyond that, what I would advise is we have the assessment tool that Joel mentioned, where out of this instrument of probably 75 plus questions that we ask these 215 FIs, applying the statistical models that Joel just mentioned, we found the 5 most determinant questions in this instrument that had the highest probability of determining where you would place on the curve. That assessment is available at no charge on alkami.com. Anybody can take it, any FI can take that and actually get a view of what segment they would likely be in today, along with prescriptive advice as to what they would need to do to close the gap between that segment cohort and the next one higher up, assuming they're not already in the most mature. So that would be my suggestion. This is a tool that's meant to be practical, not just educational for the point of being like interesting, but to actually be relevant so that when those CIOs are in the boardroom or in the C-suite arguing for their dollars and resources and why it's important, hopefully this tool is instructive and useful and practical for them to be able to take their own test, grade their own paper, measure it against 215 other FIs in the market right now, and see where they fit on that curve.
Yeah, so what are these 5 questions?
So they go to things like, how much do you prioritize digital banking over branches and call centers as a channel? They go into things like, what is your data strategy today? And what kind of technology do you have employed in data? And the reason there is because data was seen as the biggest difference maker for the most mature FIs in the study. And they go into what kinds of account opening do you offer today for new members, whether that's mobile, online, or both. And so there's 5 questions across those 3 big areas that allow you to kind of assess. So, and the idea is any FI with a digital banking background that's familiar with your retail business should be able to answer these questions with some degree of accuracy and be able to see where you're likely going to place on that curve.
One of the things I love about what you guys found too is a quarter of the organizations excelling digitally were less than $500,000 or $500 million
500 million in assets. Yeah.
Both
Yeah.
for credit unions and community banks as well. We need them both.
Yeah, that was a big finding, Sarah. You're right. And we partnered in the study with Jim Arus, who is a big influencer in this space, and we wanted his input into the study just given his expertise. And that was his huge contribution to the study. As Jim said to us in one of our brainstorming sessions, he said, is it about the size of the dog in the fight or about the size of the fight in the dog? Which is it? Is it just because I'm a mega bank that I am by virtue destined to be digitally mature because I have the assets I can throw at this and the resource? Or do smaller organizations have the right to compete? To your point, the data absolutely showed that a quarter of the most digitally mature organizations had less than $500 million in assets. Joel, do you want to tell Sarah and the audience what some of the characteristics were that we saw among those kind of those overachievers, as we call them, that were kind of punching up in their weight, and what made them different?
Sure. I would say, as I said before, the first step, I think, to getting on the road to digital maturity is changing the mindset. And so what we saw in these questions that became evident were really important through these techniques was that the institutions first had to sort of conceptualize that this was a path that we need to go down. And it was a really hopeful kind of picture in a way, because we did see the smaller institutions had made these transitions into using more and more data to make decisions, and all the way up through using machine learning and artificial intelligence for identifying customers and for additional products and such. But what we saw is that sort of on ramp to getting there starts with the mentality, and then develops with taking those first steps towards getting your data house in order, making sure that your data is accessible to you, so that when you go to try to apply it to the next decision making task, you have it there ready, and you can develop those reports and make those decisions. And then that path then leads to those more sophisticated methods that are now being employed to identify audiences and things like that. But it's a hopeful picture in the sense that you don't have to be a mega bank to get there, but you do have to start thinking about it and start taking those first steps and get on that on ramp and start getting your data house in order and moving in that direction. So.
Yeah, that on-ramp for financial institutions, but there's also the on-ramp, Allison, you kind of mentioned it a second ago too, for the consumer, is the account opening experience in mobile. And so that becomes the bank or the credit union's brand, right, for the consumer.
Absolutely. And what look, we were excited to do this research. There's so many little hidden gems throughout the research that we take no credit for. It just, like Joel said, the data just presents itself. And Sarah, to your point, what we find is even among the most advanced institutions, there's always something that they're knocking on to try to get better. So this study doesn't just go, well, this is the extent of digital maturity today, and 100% of the most advanced are doing these things all the time really, really well. What you start to find is there's even more open, blue water space, blue ocean space beyond that, one of those being mobile account opening. And if we looked at it, the most advanced organizations, while they are likely to offer mobile account opening, one of the other contributions from Jim to the study, the 5-minute mobile account opening experience. If we think about an always on culture where Amazon can deliver something to my door today, if I so desire, Jim's point, his hypothesis is, look, consumers are going to expect more and more that it's not just sufficient that you offer the option to open the account online, but that you make it as quick and efficient as possible. So the 5-minute mobile account opening or online account opening experience is extremely elusive, even in the most advanced. Only like 25 to 35%, depending if you're talking about existing members or new members, are offering that capability. That tells you that's the next frontier. And even if we look at their back office processes, how automated are you? Because a lot of times, to your earlier point, Sarah, it has to do with your legacy infrastructure in the back of house that's affecting what experience you can provide in the front of house. Those organizations, even the most mature, have room to grow when it comes to automating the back office processes to actually help them enable a better front office experience for their members. So mobile account opening comes through quite a bit in the study and in the paper for good reason, because the data kind of performed that way when we looked at it.
So I found it interesting, the level of digital maturity was also linked to, and I guess I kind of intuitively knew this, but linked to revenue growth,
Correct.
as well as not being correlated to size. So these institutions that prioritize their data utilization, as you found in the research, they experienced annual revenue growth of like 20%,
Correct.
which
That's
is
right.
astounding in probably any organization.
Correct. Yeah.
But 20% higher than the others.
Yeah, actually, they had, and Joel will correct me if I get these numbers wrong because he knows these numbers. 20% revenue growth was the most advanced organization versus 10% for the least advanced. So they actually had double the revenue growth reported than the least advanced. And that was an important metric for us when Joel and the other statisticians from our research firm were looking at the data. It was super important that we didn't just and Joel, you know, I don't mean this disrespectfully to academia, given your background, because I love academia, but we didn't want this purely to be an academic pursuit. So we could have said, oh, there's digital maturity. Let's let the model tell us the story, which we did. But then the bigger question was, well, but why does that even matter? Does it like, are we chasing something that really at the end of the day is interesting, but not relevant? So it was really important to us that we had financial metrics also baked into the study where we could ask these respondents to self-report. And in our study, 70% of our respondents actually told us the FI they were with. So we could actually also go to public reports and confirm what the revenue growth was. So the reported data shows that the most mature are growing twice as fast as the least mature, seeing 20% growth annually, where others on the low end of the spectrum are seeing 10.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that, you know, there's so much value in the data that these institutions have, you know, knowing what their customers are, you know, potentially sort of interested in maybe even before the customer knows it. And so, you know, just kind of getting that data house in order and being able to make a few decisions based on, gee, you know, these people seem more likely to maybe want to refinance their home or, you know, something like that. Like those small things that when you start getting that data house in order, seem, you know, can actually really enhance kind of the revenue perspective of the bank or the revenue opportunities for the bank. So the FI. And so it's, yeah, so that I think that's really important to underscore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the one part of the research, it says that digitally mature organizations focus on results over aesthetics. Can you, it was one thing I wasn't quite sure I understood that concept. So I think it was interesting, the information in there, but if you can go a little deeper with that.
Sure. So a couple of ways that we find that. One is in the way that they describe themselves. So the most advanced organizations, when we asked all these FIs to pick from a series of 10 adjectives to describe their culture, and they could pick up to 3 adjectives, what best describes your institution's culture? What we found was that the most mature, digitally mature institutions in the study were much more likely to say they were results driven versus friendly or team oriented, which you saw much more higher incidence among the least mature. We also find that the most mature organizations say that they are much more likely to trust data when making decisions than their own experience or instinct, which you find the opposite when you look at the least mature. So we see, and then when we talk about the aesthetics, we ask, these are digital banking decision makers, what's most important to you in your digital banking platform? Is it the speed? Is it the aesthetics? Or is it the features and the capabilities of the platform? The least mature organizations are much more likely to say it's about the aesthetics. The more mature organizations are much more likely to say it's about the functionality and the features. So you start to see in more ways than one how there are clear indicators that they are results driven, not just in how they describe themselves, it's in the way that they make decisions with the data that they use internally. And it's also in what they value when they think about what makes a great digital banking platform great.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the interesting aspects too about the results driven kind of culture there is that one of the things that we found that was interesting for me was that, you know, these institutions are also pushing their service providers, their you know, the companies like Alkami that provide digital infrastructure, they're much more likely to say that they're pushing those vendors to do and to create and to, change their offerings. And so that was a really interesting result. And in fact, it's really interesting to watch Allison. She's presented this now a couple of times to some of Alkami's clients, and she tells them, you need to push us, which is kind of a reflection of Alkami's culture, I think, of kind of iterative improvement and engagement. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very true, Joel. Yeah, it is true. But it's like, I love, Joel, that you mentioned that, because it's true. It's the culture. When we talk culture, we're talking big C culture here. It's not just the culture internally. It is the culture they have with their ecosystem of partners. And Joel's 100% right. They're much more likely to say, we push our partners forward, versus the least mature are likely to say, our partners push us.
Mhm.
So they imbue it through their entire, the culture comes through, whether they're talking internally to their employees or whether they're talking to the partners in the ecosystem that have to help them be great.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that hopefully some of those people asking for advancements or additions or whatever are credit union people too.
Oh, 100%. Yes,
Yeah.
that's that goes without saying, especially with the credit unions being so rightfully concerned about the member experience and really
Mhm.
elevating that above a lot of other things. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and that goes to the next question I have, and I don't know who wants to take this first, but there's a segment where banks and credit unions go toe to toe. Can you?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were the
We
results
see
there?
we see a couple of differences with banks and credit unions. First, we see credit unions tend to be better on the account opening experience. Banks tend to be more mature on the data side. We see credit unions tending to be more receptive to change. So we see a little bit more change adaptiveness with credit unions. And the last one that I remember off the top of my head that struck me was credit unions are also more likely than banks to look outside of the financial services industry for talent.
Mhm.
This instrument went pretty broad. So we even went into what are their hiring philosophies and how do they think about the talent war and what does that look like? And credit unions are more likely than banks to actually hire from outside of the immediate industry to go find talent in these spots. So yeah, credit unions definitely had some interesting differences here.
Mhm. And I think the war for talent in particular, one of my goals is to make credit unions employers of choice, and part of that, of course, is the technology that they have available to them that makes their jobs not only easier but makes serving their members easier as well. So now, as per usual, I allow my guests to have final thoughts. I try to not have the last word except at home. Allison, we'll start with you. Final
Okay.
thoughts.
So listen, what I would say is it was important to us with this study that we snap the chalk lines on what digital maturity is at the highest altitude across the widest cross section of financial institutions in the US today. But we wanted to make it practical. So I would encourage your listeners, go to alkami.com, take the self-assessment and get practical prescription as to where you are on the curve and what you can do to evolve your institution forward. And if nothing else, what I assure you, Sarah, is it's going to invite a lot of conversation in these FIs around debating some of the answers to these questions that appear straightforward and are straightforward at the surface. But I know from my own consultation with Alkami clients on this, it's amazing the spirited debate you get in the C-suite around, well, would you answer that question that way? Or how would I answer that question? And that alone can be a very valuable learning experience for FIs for no other reason than to take the assessment and see what conversations it sparks. Joel, I'm gonna turn to you for your last thoughts.
I was gonna make a point about conversations. I think this instrument, there's no 5 questions that can perfectly categorize someone with respect, or an institution with respect to their digital maturity. What we did was we came up with, letting the data be our guide. We identified these 5 that we thought were the best. We didn't want our online instrument to be really arduous, or, you have to put in like financial data or anything like that. We wanted it to be pretty straightforward. So these 5 questions give you a guide. And I think the way to look at it is, these are conversation starters. These are, this is a jumping off point with which, in which you can have conversations internally. It's led to really interesting conversations when I've seen Allison present the results to FIs. Those conversations have been great. And it's just, it's really is it's a jumping off point for, thinking about what it means to be digitally mature and getting on that on-ramp to, wherever you are on the spectrum, like thinking about what is sort of what are the next steps, and we're always open to, gee, you should have asked this question or you should have asked that question, because we too at Alkami are always thinking about how do we iterate and improve. And so some of those conversations with FIs have been just fascinating. They really want to see the entire instrument. They don't just want the 5 questions, they want the whole instrument. So both times I've seen it presented, the feedback has been, can we see the whole thing? Can we take the instrument so that we can, talk about these things internally? And it's really interesting to see the results play out like that.
Excellent wrap up. Thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. Good, great having you, Allison and Joel.
Thank you so much for having us, Sarah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.